The girl he'd pulled from the hands of traffickers on a rainy Seoul night. The girl with no name, no family, no home, walked into the courtroom 19 years later wearing a black suit and carrying a briefcase. The most feared man in Korea sat at the defendant's table, alone, the empire he had built over decades crumbling around him. He had saved her life once, in a dark street, without knowing her name. She had come back to save his. Rain had been falling over Seoul since late afternoon, the heavy, indifferent kind that empties streets in minutes and turns the city into a maze of closed umbrellas and shuttered stalls. By 8 o'clock, the train station district was almost deserted. The restaurants were still lit, the convenience stores were still open, but the pavement between them belonged to nobody except Annie, who had been sitting beneath the narrow overhang of a closed flower stall since the rain began, watching her unsold flowers slowly surrender to the water. She was 9 years old. She had been alone for 4 of those years. She had learned in those 4 years to notice everything, which streets were safe and which weren't, which restaurant owners would chase her away and which one sometimes left food near the back door, which strangers walked too slowly past a child sitting alone, and why. She had learned to notice the black SUV 3 minutes before the men got out of it. There were 3 of them. They stood just outside the rain, talking in low voices, their eyes moving across the nearly empty street with the particular patience of people who are waiting for something specific. Annie had seen that look before, not on these men, but on others like them, men who appeared in places where children slept alone, who smiled too carefully, who asked questions that sounded friendly and weren't. The old woman at the rice stall 2 streets over had told her once, in the direct way of someone who had seen too much to soften bad things, "Some men look for children nobody will miss." So Annie pulled her basket close and prepared to leave, moving quietly, not running, because running drew attention, and she had learned that too. One of them saw her anyway. "Little girl." His voice was pleasant. That was worse than if it hadn't been. She did not stop. She walked faster, her small feet finding the gaps between the puddles, her heart doing something loud and unpleasant in her chest, and she was beginning to think she might actually make it, might turn the corner and disappear into the back streets. She knew better than they did, when she ran directly into a wall. Except it wasn't a wall. It caught her. Strong hands closed around her shoulders before she hit the ground, and Annie looked up with the specific terror of a child who has run from one danger directly into another and found, instead, a face she recognized. Everyone in Seoul knew that face. The newspapers ran it regularly, almost always in connection with words like powerful and feared and empire. Kang Jae-hyun was one of the most influential men in the country, and he was crouching in the rain outside a closed flower stall holding a 9-year-old girl's shoulders, while his bodyguards fanned out behind him and the 3 men from the black SUV, who had been moving toward her with that careful, unhurried patience, went completely still. The moment stretched. Then the men turned and walked back to their vehicle. They did not run. They simply left with the quiet efficiency of people who know when a situation has changed beyond recovery. The SUV pulled away without its lights on. Annie watched it go and then looked back at the man holding her and found that he was watching her, not the car, as though she were the more interesting of the 2 things that had just happened. She was shaking. She told herself it was the cold and the rain, and she almost believed it. His gaze moved across her with the attention of someone cataloging things. The torn shoes, the wilting flowers, the basket she was clutching with both hands, the way she was trying very hard to look as though she was fine. "What are you doing outside this late?" Annie's first instinct was not to answer. Years on the streets had given her exactly one rule that she had never broken. Don't tell strangers anything true. But she was still shaking, and the men in the SUV were gone, and something in his voice was not what she expected from a man whose name appeared in newspaper headlines about fear. "Working," she said. "Where are your parents?" The question hit the way it always hit, not like a wound, exactly, more like pressing on something that had been bruised so long it had changed shape. She looked at the pavement. "I don't have any." The rain fell between them. His bodyguards stood at a respectful distance. A long moment passed, and she felt something change in the air between them. Something she couldn't name. And when she looked up, she found his face, doing something she had not expected from the face that appeared in newspapers either. It looked like pain. Old pain. The kind that had been folded up and put away. She was 9 years old, and she had nothing, and she noticed anyway. "You look sad," she said. Most adults reacted to her in one of two ways. They either pretended she didn't exist, or they performed a kind of brisk sympathy that had somewhere else to be. This man did neither. He looked at her as though she had said something unexpected and important. "Do I?" "Very sad," she said. "Like someone took something from you a long time ago, and you're still looking for it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a genuine laugh, brief and slightly startled, the kind that escapes before the person decides to let it, and it changed his face in a way the newspapers never showed. Before he could say anything, Annie's stomach made a sound that she had given up being embarrassed about roughly a year ago, but which now, for some reason, embarrassed her enormously. She gripped the basket tighter. "I'm okay," she said. Her stomach said something else. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who has made a decision. "When did you last eat?" She looked at the ground. The rain answered for her. The restaurant was small and warm, and the lights inside it were the color of something safe. Annie sat across from him at a corner table and looked at the food that kept arriving, more food than she had seen in one place in months, and found that she couldn't eat. Not because she wasn't hungry. She was so hungry it was difficult to think. But there was something wrong with just taking it, with simply eating the way people ate when food was something ordinary. And she sat very still and stared at the table until he said, "Gently, you can eat." She looked up. What if someone else needs it? The restaurant went quiet in the particular way spaces go quiet when something has been said that everyone in them understands is important. Jae-hyun set down his coffee slowly. "What do you mean?" She looked at her hands. "If I eat too much, there might not be enough for someone else." It was a perfectly logical thing to believe if you had learned everything you knew about food from not having it. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not read. Then he said very carefully, "This food belongs to you, Annie." She looked up fast. Nobody had said her name like that in a very long time, like it was something specific and real and worth saying clearly. All of it. "Well," he said with the same slightly startled quality as the laugh, "perhaps not quite all of it." And she smiled. It was a small smile, uncertain at the edges, the kind that has been out of practice. But it was real, and it made the corner of the warm restaurant feel like somewhere she could breathe, and the tears came before she could stop them. The quiet kind, the kind that arrive after you've been holding something for too long and something small has finally given you permission to put it down. She ate, slowly at first, then less slowly, then with the concentrated urgency of someone who has learned to eat quickly because things disappear. He watched. He did not comment. He simply sat across from her with his coffee going cold and watched her eat and said nothing. And she understood, with the specific instinct of a child who has survived by reading people accurately, that he was not watching to judge her or pity her, but simply because she mattered to him, which was the most disorienting thing anyone had done for her in 4 years. When the restaurant began to close, she looked out the window at the rain and felt the evening collapse back into what it was. The bus station, the cold, the bench that was just barely sheltered enough to sleep under. She stood to go. Then his hand covered hers on the table. She looked at it, then at him. His eyes held the same expression as before, that old, folded away pain, but something else now, something newer and less guarded. "Annie," he said, "would you like to come home with me?" The rain fell outside. The warm restaurant lights flickered once, and Annie, who had not let herself want anything in a very long time, felt something break open in her chest that she did not have a word for yet. She started crying before she could answer, and the crying was the answer, and Kang Jae-hyun, Korea's most feared man, sat very still and let her cry until she was done. The bed was too soft. This was Annie's first thought upon waking in the room Jae-hyun had given her, a room larger than any space she had ever occupied alone, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a ceiling so far above her that the light from it felt like it was coming from a different country. The mattress was the problem. She had slept on benches and on the hard floors of empty buildings and on the ground itself during the worst weeks, and her body had learned to rest against something solid and unyielding, and the softness of this mattress felt like being swallowed. She lay on top of the blankets instead and looked at the ceiling and thought about what was real, which was a thing she had learned to do whenever something good happened, so that she wouldn't be too surprised when it stopped. Breakfast was worse than the mattress, in the particular way that abundance is sometimes harder than scarcity, because it removes the familiar weight you've been carrying and you have to figure out how to stand without it. The dining table was covered with more food than Annie could look at steadily. Eggs and toast and fruit and pancakes and fresh juice in a glass pitcher that caught the morning light like something decorative. She stood at the edge of the room and stared at it. Jae-hyun looked up from his newspaper. "Aren't you hungry?" She was desperately hungry. She was also incapable in that moment of simply walking to the table and eating, because her entire understanding of food was built around the assumption that there wasn't enough of it and someone had to decide who got what, and she didn't know how to operate in a version of the world where that wasn't true. "What if somebody else needs it?" she said. The maid near the sideboard stopped moving. Jae-hyun set down his newspaper slowly, with the care of someone setting down something he doesn't want to break. He looked at her across the enormous table, this small girl in an oversized borrowed shirt standing at the edge of a room full of food she was afraid to eat, and something happened in his expression that she would recognize later, much later, as the moment he decided something permanent. "This food is yours, Annie," he said. "All of it." He almost smiled. "As much as you need." She walked to the table. She sat down. She ate. And the tears came again, quietly, and he did not mention them. The bread started a week later. The maids found the first piece beneath her mattress on a Tuesday, a thick heel of bread wrapped carefully in a napkin, dry but intact. They mentioned it to Jae-hyun. He told them to leave it and say nothing. The following week, there were 3 pieces, then a small roll, then half a sandwich. Every night, Annie moved through the darkness to the kitchen and found something she could carry and brought it back and hid it beneath the mattress, not because she was hungry in the night, but because she needed to know it was there. Needed to know that tomorrow, if the food didn't come, if the table was empty, if the warmth of this inexplicable life turned out to be something that could be taken back, she would not be entirely without. Jae-hyun finally asked her about it gently one evening, sitting across from her in the study. Her face went pale. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. He shook his head. "Don't apologize. I want to understand." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "On the streets, some days I found food. Some days I didn't. Sometimes 3 days would go by." Her voice was very small. "So when I see food I can take, I take it. Because what if tomorrow it isn't there?" He was quiet for a long moment after that. Then he stood and went upstairs and came back with a small wooden box and placed it on the table in front of her. Inside was money, more money than she had ever seen. Enough to eat for a year if she was careful about it. "That belongs to you," he said. She stared at it. "And if you ever need more, you ask me. Not because you can't manage alone, because you don't have to." She looked up at him. "What if it runs out?" His voice was steady. "Then I'll give you more." "What if you're not here?" "Annie." He looked directly at her, and his face was doing the thing she had learned to read, the thing where all the careful composure fell away, and what was underneath it was simply true. "As long as I'm alive, you will never go hungry again." She cried herself to sleep that night, not with sadness, but with the specific, overwhelming relief of someone who has been standing guard against a danger for so long that being told they can rest feels like something breaking loose inside their chest. The charity event happened 6 weeks after she arrived. The mansion filled with people dressed in things that cost more than everything Annie had ever owned combined, and she stood in the doorway of the main hall in a new dress that still felt borrowed and watched the children of wealthy people move through the room with the easy, unthinking confidence of those who have never had to calculate whether they belong somewhere. She tried to stay near the edges. It didn't work. Children have a particular cruelty that operates in whispers, and she heard them. The homeless girl. She used to sleep on streets. Look at her. And she absorbed each word the way she had absorbed rain on the nights, without shelter, simply enduring until it stopped. She slipped out to the garden and sat beside the fountain with her hands in her lap and told herself it didn't matter, which was a thing she had told herself many times and which had never once been fully true. He found her there. He always found her. What happened? She shook her head. Nothing. Annie. The way he said her name was the one thing she could never defend against. It arrived like something warm and steady, and it undid whatever she had been building to keep herself intact. She started crying. "They're right," she said. "I don't belong here." He was very still for a moment. Then he crouched in front of her in the garden, in his expensive suit, and looked at her with the expression that she would carry for the rest of her life. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "When I found you, you were the strongest person I had ever met." She shook her head. "You survived things most adults couldn't have. You were hungry and alone and frightened, and you were still kind. You asked a stranger if he was sad." Another tear slid down her face. "You belong wherever you choose to belong. And if the whole world stood against you," his voice shook slightly, "I would still choose you. Every time." She stared at him through blurred eyes. He stood. He took her hand. He walked her back inside through the main doors, across the main hall, past every guest and every child and every carefully assembled wealthy person. And he held her hand exactly as he was holding it, and he said in the voice he used when something was simply true and not a question, "This is Annie. She is my daughter." The room went quiet. Annie went completely still. Jae-hyun looked down at her with the expression she had no word for yet. The one she would later understand was the first time in years that he had felt like a father. And Annie, who had been nobody's daughter for 4 years, felt something in her chest rearrange itself permanently. The uniform fit perfectly and felt completely wrong. Annie stood outside the gates of the school on the first morning and looked at the children arriving in luxury cars, being embraced by parents who had somewhere to be, and felt the familiar arithmetic of belonging, the calculation you run automatically when you enter a space, checking whether you add up to someone who should be in it. She didn't. She looked at Jae-hyun beside her. "What if they find out where I came from?" He gently fixed a strand of hair that had fallen across her face, which was the kind of thing she imagined fathers did and which made her eyes sting immediately. "Then they'll know you survived things they couldn't imagine," he said. "Never be ashamed of surviving, Annie. It makes you extraordinary, not less." She did not entirely believe him, but she walked through the gates anyway. The morning went better than she expected. She answered questions confidently. She had spent the years since meeting Jae-hyun reading every book in his library with the focused hunger of someone making up for lost time. And one of the teachers pulled her aside before lunch to say she was remarkable, which was a word nobody had ever applied to her before and which she turned over in her mind all through the first period. Then lunch happened. She sat alone at a table with her tray, and the girls from her class gathered nearby, and the whispers started with the particular speed of information that has found eager carriers. The homeless girl. She slept on streets. She only has a home because he felt sorry for her. One of them said it directly, with the composed confidence of a child who has never experienced consequences. If it wasn't for Mr. Kong, she'd still be begging. The table laughed. Not all of it, but enough. Annie stood quietly, picked up her tray, and walked out of the cafeteria without running, which was the hardest thing she had done in months. She made it to the bathroom before the crying started. Real crying, the ugly kind that she usually only allowed alone at night, the kind that brought everything with it, every cold night and every hungry morning, and every time she had watched other children through the windows of warm houses and understood that the glass was not the barrier. She didn't tell him. He knew anyway. He had always been able to read her. Something in the particular quality of her silence, the way she moved through the mansion like something that was trying not to disturb the air. He found her that evening on the balcony, watching the stars with the expression of someone trying to decide whether to believe something. They said, "I'm only here because you felt sorry for me." The words stayed in the air between them. Then what if they're right? What if I'm just a poor street girl pretending to be someone I'm not? He sat down beside her. She had never heard him be quiet the way he was quiet in the next few seconds. Not controlled, not composing himself, but arriving at something true and deciding to give it to her directly. When my wife died, he said, I stopped living. Not breathing, I kept breathing. I kept working. I kept building things. But I was gone. Inside, I was completely gone. She looked at him. He had never spoken about his wife to her before. Then one rainy night, I met a small girl carrying flowers. A girl who had every reason to be bitter and wasn't. A girl who was hungrier than I have ever been in my entire life, and who looked at a stranger and asked if he was okay. She was crying before she realized it. His voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. You think I rescued you, Annie, but I need you to understand something. He looked at her directly. You rescued me first. The tears fell down her face, and for a moment also down his, which she had never seen before, and which undid something in her completely. They sat together under the stars, father and daughter, crying without pretending not to, and something that had been broken in both of them began, very quietly, to mend. He pulled her into his arms. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. You are not my daughter because I felt sorry for you, he said into her hair. You are my daughter because I love you, and if the whole world stood against you tomorrow, I would still choose you. I will always choose you. She buried her face in his chest and held on. And that night, she slept without nightmares for the first time in 4 years. And downstairs in his office, Jae-hyun sat before an old photograph of his late wife and whispered, with tears on his face and something new and fragile and real where the emptiness had been, I think you would have loved her. 10 years passed the way good years pass. Faster than they should. Noticed only in retrospect when you look at a face you love and see how much it has changed. The 9-year-old girl who had hidden bread under her mattress became a 19-year-old who fell asleep over law books, who had strong opinions about justice and the failures of legal systems that protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, who had decided before she was 12 that she would spend her life doing something about it. Jae-hyun watched her become herself with the particular pride of a parent who had the sense to know his job was not to shape her, but to make enough space for her to grow into whatever she already was. He had not expected her to be this. He had not expected her to be magnificent. He should have. He had found her magnificent when she had nothing. But watching it happen over 10 years was something different, something he had no adequate word for. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. He was reading his newspaper at the breakfast table when Annie came in holding the envelope with an expression he had not seen since the early days. A small, controlled expression that meant something very large was happening inside her. She opened it standing at the kitchen counter, and he watched her face as she read, and when the tears came he already knew before she said anything. She held the letter out to him wordlessly. He took it. Full scholarship. Harvard Law School. He read it twice. Then he set it down very carefully, the way he had set down his newspaper on the morning she'd asked about sharing food. And he looked at his daughter across the breakfast table. His daughter, that word still arriving with the same weight it had carried since the first time he used it publicly, in a ballroom full of people, with her hand in his, and he laughed. A full, unguarded laugh, the kind that comes when the heart is too full for anything smaller. She started crying. He stood and crossed the room and held her, and she held him back, and neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said about the fact that the girl who had sat on a wet pavement counting coins had just been offered the most prestigious legal education in the world. The celebration that evening filled the mansion with more warmth than it had held since Annie had first arrived. The staff cheered. The cooks prepared a feast. Everyone was happy. Jae-hyun smiled through all of it, and nobody noticed that it was the smile of a man doing two things at once, celebrating for her and grieving privately, the way parents do when a child's triumph and their own loss are the same event. That night, after the house went quiet, he sat in the garden and allowed himself to feel it without managing it. He went through the memories the way he went through things he needed to examine carefully the first morning the bread under the mattress, the charity event, and her hand in his as he introduced her to the room, the balcony, and the stars, and the night they had both cried without apology. He had not expected any of this. He had found her by accident on a rainy street, chasing away men whose intentions he had understood immediately and completely and dealt with as he dealt with all threats, thoroughly and permanently. He had fed her because she was hungry and taken her home because the alternative was unacceptable and kept her because she was already, within 72 hours of meeting him, irreplaceable. He had not planned to love her. He had not planned anything that had happened since that night. He was profoundly grateful for every minute of it. "Dad." He looked up. She was standing in the garden doorway in her pajamas. She came and sat beside him without being asked. They were quiet together, the good kind of quiet that had taken years to build. "You're sad," she said finally. He almost smiled. "Only to you." She took his hand. "You're allowed to be sad." "I know. I'll come back." "I know that too." "Then why do you look like that?" He looked at the sky. "Because you've been the best part of my life for 10 years, he said, "and I'm going to miss you." She leaned against his shoulder. They sat together for a long time. He was proud. He was heartbroken. Both things were completely true, and neither canceled the other out. He gave her the necklace at the airport in the crowded departure terminal with announcements overhead and strangers moving in every direction, which was entirely the wrong place for it and exactly the right one. It was a small silver pendant, a flower, delicate and specific. She looked at it and then at him and understood immediately. "Because that's how we found each other," he said. She started crying before he finished the sentence. The memories arrived all at once. The rain, the wilting flowers, the coins that were never enough, the hunger, the 3 men getting out of the black car, the strong hands that caught her before she fell, the man who had been standing between her and disaster before she ever knew his name. She put the necklace on. The last boarding call sounded. She looked at him, at his gray-streaked hair and the slight heaviness in his shoulders that had appeared over the past few years, at his eyes that were doing what they did when he felt something completely and was trying to be dignified about it. She threw her arms around him. He held her with the same certainty he had always held her, the certainty of someone who has decided that a person matters and has never wavered from that decision since. "You are never alone," he said into her hair. "Wherever you go, you are never alone." She stepped back. She looked at him one last time. "I love you, Dad." He smiled, though his eyes were very red. "I love you too, Annie." She walked through the gate. He stood in the terminal until the gate closed. And then he stood there a little longer in the loud, indifferent crowd of the departure hall, feeling the specific weight of an empty house arriving for the first time in 10 years. He was proud. He was completely alone. Both things were true. The betrayal came from someone he had trusted since before Annie arrived, a man named Choi, who had been at his side through the building of everything he had built, and who had, it turned out, been quietly building something else on the side, something that required Jae-hyun to fall. The false evidence appeared first in the financial records, small discrepancies that seemed to point toward crimes Jae-hyun had not committed. Then the business partners began withdrawing, citing concern and legal exposure. Then the former allies who had benefited for years from their connection to him began giving interviews to newspapers about things they claimed to have seen. The empire that had taken 30 years to build began to come apart with the speed of things that have been undermined from within, all at once, from every direction. The structural damage revealing itself only after the collapse had already begun. By the time the formal charges were filed, the media had already issued its verdict. Korea's most feared man had finally revealed himself to be what everyone had always suspected. The courtroom was full of reporters before the first day of trial. 66. Jae-hyun sat at the defendant's table and felt, for the first time in a very long time, old. Not tired, he had been tired before, had pushed through exhaustion more times than he could count. Old, like someone who has been fighting for a very long time and is aware, with the clarity that sometimes comes from that this particular fight might be the one he does not win. He had lawyers, excellent ones, expensive ones, But the evidence against him was constructed with the specific competence of someone who understood exactly how his world worked. And the people who might have testified on his behalf were disappearing behind closed doors and unavailable phones. He had not called Annie. He had decided in the first week that he would not call her, that she had a life in America and a future that had nothing to do with this, that she had spent enough of her childhood in difficulty and he would not drag her back into one of his. He did not tell himself this was anything other than pride, which it partly was. He missed her every day of the 3 months between the charges and the trial. He did not call. On the 4th day of the trial, when the prosecution was preparing to deliver the argument that would, by most legal assessments, end the case, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned. The judge paused mid-gesture. The reporters lifted their cameras. A young woman walked in at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow, but that had the quality of someone who has decided exactly where they're going and why. She was 24 years old. She wore a black suit that she had bought the day she passed the bar, 3 years earlier, and she had been wearing variations of it ever since, because she had learned very young that the world took you more seriously when you dressed like you took yourself seriously, and she had learned very early to take herself seriously. Around her neck was a silver flower pendant. Jae-hyun saw it from across the courtroom, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Annie. His voice came out barely above a whisper. She looked at him, the same way she had looked at him across a restaurant table when she was 9 years old, with the focused, complete attention of someone who has decided you are worth seeing clearly. She was not the frightened little girl. She was a lawyer. She had come home. She crossed the courtroom and sat beside him and said, very quietly, "You should have called me." He looked at her. "Annie, we'll discuss that later," she said. "Right now, I need you to tell me everything." He told her everything. She listened the way she always listened, completely missing nothing, building a picture from the details the way she had once built a life from whatever materials were available. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and addressed the judge with the composed authority of someone twice her age, and she asked for a continuance to review evidence. And the judge, after a brief examination of her credentials, granted it. Outside the courtroom, the reporters swarmed. She walked through them without stopping because she had work to do. She worked for 3 weeks without sleeping properly. The suite she had rented near the courthouse became a map of evidence. Documents spread across the floor and the desk and the table. Photographs pinned to the wall. Timelines drawn on large sheets of paper in her particular handwriting, which was very small and very precise. She reviewed everything twice. She questioned witnesses herself in the careful, unhurried way she had learned from the professors who had recognized in her something exceptional, the ability to ask a question that sounds simple and opens a door the person being asked did not know they were standing in front of. She found the thread on a Wednesday at 2 in the morning, a small inconsistency in the financial records, a date that didn't match, a transaction that had been made to look like Jae-hyun's but that had originated, when she pulled the chain of it back to its source, from an account that Choi had closed 2 weeks before the charges were filed. She sat in the dark suite with the evidence in front of her and understood what had been done and who had done it and why, and felt the particular cold clarity of someone who has seen the full shape of something and knows exactly what to do with it. In the courtroom, when she presented the evidence, she did it without drama. She simply laid it out, the account, the dates, the transactions, the pattern, the original documents that Choi had altered and the originals she had obtained through legitimate channels that showed the alterations. She questioned Choi on the stand with the same quiet precision. She did not attack him. She simply asked him to explain specific things, one after another, each question removing a support from what had been constructed so carefully until there was nowhere left for the construction to stand. He broke before she reached her final question. Not dramatically, he simply stopped being able to continue. And in the silence that followed his non-answer, the courtroom understood what it was looking at. His confession came in pieces, each one landing in the packed room with the weight of something that has been held under pressure for a long time and has finally been released. The false evidence, the witnesses he had paid, The years of quiet preparation for the moment when his own position would become untenable and he would need someone else to take the fall. He had chosen the person closest to him because he had understood that people would believe it of the most feared man more easily than they would believe it of a trusted associate. He had understood correctly. He had not understood Annie. The verdict came on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was the fullest it had been on any day of the trial. Reporters, observers, people who had followed the case online and come in person for the ending. Annie sat beside Jae-hyun. She had not slept the night before, and he had made her tea at 4 in the morning in the kitchen of the suite, which was the first domestic thing they had done together in 3 years, and which had made neither of them say anything for a long time. The judge entered. The room stood. The judge sat. The room sat. The silence was the particular kind that doesn't feel like quiet, that has too much in it. Then the words came clearly into the packed room. The defendant is found not guilty on all charges. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Annie put her face in her hands, and the tears came with the force of everything that had been held back for 3 weeks. The sleeplessness, the fear, the weight of loving someone whose freedom depends on whether you are good enough at your job. Jae-hyun put his arms around her. He held her the way he had held her that first night in the restaurant, when she had been 9 years old and crying with relief because someone had offered her food. He had held her at every difficult point since. This was no different, and completely different. She pulled back and looked at him, and he was crying too, which she had seen only twice before in her life, and both times she had remembered it. "You came back," he said. "I promised I would," she said. Outside the courtroom, the cameras caught them walking out together, which became the photograph that appeared everywhere. Not the feared businessman and his lawyer, but the expression on his face when he looked at her, which was not the expression anyone expected from the most feared man in Korea, and which was, simply and completely, the expression of a father who is very proud and very relieved and cannot quite believe his luck. Months after the verdict, in the time that came after, the quiet, unhurried time that neither of them had had enough of, Annie told him she was staying. She said it simply on a warm evening in the garden while the sky was doing something extraordinary in orange and pink above the city, the way she said things that were important, without build-up or decoration, just directly. "I'm thinking of staying. In Korea. With you." He looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know." She smiled. "I want to." He looked away, toward the sky, because looking at her directly sometimes still did to him what it had done since the beginning. Broke through whatever he was holding, reached the thing underneath. "You know," he said, "finally, I used to think losing my family was the end of my story." She squeezed his hand. "Then I met a little girl selling flowers in the rain." Both of them smiled at the same time at the same memory. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out something small and worn and carefully preserved. A photograph, old enough now that the edges had softened. She had seen it before, but not in years. The first picture they had ever taken together, shortly after she arrived in the kitchen of this house, before she had started to believe that staying was something that could happen to her. She laughed a little at her 9-year-old face. Then he turned it over. On the back, in his handwriting, were words she had never seen. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. "The day I met Annie was the day my life began again." The tears came so suddenly she couldn't stop them. She looked at him. He was watching her with the expression she had spent 19 years learning to read and had never fully gotten used to. The one that meant she was not a child he had rescued from a rainy street, but a person he had chosen, specifically and deliberately, and would choose again in every version of events, without hesitation and without condition. "You saved my life," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You saved mine first." They looked at each other across 19 years of that, across every hungry night and soft morning, across the bread under the mattress and the school bathroom and the stars from the balcony and the airport and the courtroom and all of it, and neither of them needed to say anything more. The sun went down over Seoul. Annie rested her head on his shoulder, exactly as she had done when she was 9 years old, sitting in a garden that had once felt like someone else's and had become gradually and completely hers. No more fear, no more loneliness, only a father, a daughter, and the unbreakable thing they had built together from a rainy night and a basket of wilting flowers, the thing that had outlasted poverty and grief and betrayal and distance and time itself. And that would, she understood now with the certainty of someone who has tested it against everything the world could throw at it, last the rest of their lives.